Hi, my name is Julian Voss-Andreae, and I had this idea when I heard the ISC turned 60, and I thought three-dimensional space, 60. I had this idea that the perfect logo would be the Buckyball. The Buckyball is a solid, a three-dimensional shape that arises when you take 60 dots and paint them on the surface of a sphere and have them all the same distance to each other. That same shape is called, in mathematics, it's called a truncated icosahedron, and that means it's an icosahedron, which is a 20 triangle solid, platonic solid, and you chop off every corner. That's why it's called truncated. And that's the same shape as a soccer ball, the European soccer ball. I've been intrigued with buckyballs for a long time because my background's in physics, and we took carbon-60 molecules, which are shaped like buckyballs, and they are usually colloquially called buckyballs, and we showed that they too are basically subject to quantum behavior. They don't only behave like a particle but also as a wave. That's a long story, we're not going to talk about this, but it's really interesting to look at the cultural history of this shape. We have the first mentioning that we are aware of today is from 2,500 years ago almost. Aristotle mentioned the shape. And then the oldest drawings we have is from Leonardo da Vinci. He illustrated a math book in 1490 with a truncated icosahedron, the buckyball structure. And that was also, that image led to my first sculpture of that shape in 2004, right when I was out of college, the first thing I ever made in my garage. The discovery of the buckyball has a really interesting history. It's carbon was known for millennia as to come in two different conformations. One is called diamond, it's this wonderfully hard, translucent, famous thing, and then the other one is graphite. So in the graphite, the carbon atoms are arranged in hexagons on a flat plane, so you can imagine your bathroom tile floor. It looks just like that. So if you take one of those hexagons and change them into a pentagon, then that whole flat plane starts curving around. And when you replace exactly 12 of the hexagons with pentagons, it will curve around in itself and become a buckyball. In the early 1980s, people were puzzled by the light spectrum of red giants. Those are like stars. And they saw that the spectrum, the colors of that light, is not just a broad distribution like a rainbow of the sun that the sun makes, but they were like very narrow bands, like only very few colors. And the only explanation for that is that there must be something really, really symmetric that when it oscillates, emits that kind of very narrow light of only one or two colors. And it turns out then they went into the lab and shot a laser at some carbon, and then they found, then they looked at the debris that flew out with a mass spectrometer, and they saw that there's spikes at peaks at carbon 60. So the clusters they saw were not 59 carbon atoms or 61 carbon atoms, but almost always exactly 60. And so they asked themselves, how can that be? And then this one guy had an epiphany because he had seen the 1967 World Expo US Pavilion in Montreal, which was built by Buckminster Fuller, the crazy, interesting American architect, and he pioneered those geodesic domes. And then he had that epiphany that he thought, that's exactly the same structure. You can take, 60 points, make a sphere out of them, and it arranges into that same exact configuration. That's how they had the idea of the buckyball structure as a new carbon modification, and also gave it the name Buckminster Fullerene, which is the official title for that molecule. The first time we built this buckyball was in 2006, and we started from the ground up. And the goal was, in order to make it structural, we hit a giant branch that was exactly 30 feet up in the air. So that's how I determined the length of the struts. And then gravity kicked in, which I didn't realize at that time, and the whole thing was like shy of 1 or 2 feet, and not meeting this branch. So we had to put up a giant pulley system in the forest to pull it together, and that wasn't enough. Then we had to put up a scaffolding and force it over this branch. The second time around was this installation, and we built a 40-foot by 40-foot scaffolding, 40 foot tall, and started building the buckyball from the top. And then while we built the buckyball, we dismantled the scaffolding. And at the end it was all done. It was hanging there in the trees, supported by the trees, growing with the trees over the years. And you can even walk under it and look up when you see, the sky behind it. So the buckyball structure is not only unique, of course, to the non-living world of the atoms and molecules, but also it's found in our bodies. As clathrin, for example. That was only discovered not so long ago. So one really interesting thing to me is that the Buckyball logo fits the year 2020 so well, is that, you know, all viruses, all spherical viruses are based on that same icosahedral Buckyball structure. They all come in numbers of subunits of 60 times an integer number, including the coronavirus, which was of course the hallmark symbol of the year 2020.